So let's talk about the difference between a leader and a manager. This topic is important because as investors, we should be looking to invest in companies that have good leadership, not bad management. So there are two locations you can look for or really look at the content on what you're dealing with. Number one would be YouTube. Go to YouTube, type in whatever CEO you're looking to do research on, and just type in their name and interviews and see what you can find. Sometimes CNBC will have pretty good interviews. There's other places you can look, or there's other publication or media platforms, but a lot of the content you can find on YouTube. The second place you can go is Glassdoor. I know not every company in the world is on Glassdoor, but it's a great location to see what employees are saying about the leadership or management of a company. To give you an idea, like, is this some place I want to invest in? A company with really high turnover, which can be caused by bad management, is a place we should probably avoid investing in. But anyway, let's dive into 8 differences between a leader and a manager. Number one would be servant leadership. So years ago, I remember sitting in a meeting, there was somebody a bit older asked the question, what is this servant leadership everybody's talking about? And I kind of looked around the room and I decided to speak up and I said, well, in servant leadership, a leader works for their employees, whereas you flip that equation around, a manager makes their employees work for them. And this individual immediately scoffed at that response. Like, no, I don't work for my employees work for me. Okay, it's not 1955 anymore. Things are run differently. So let's talk about what that really means. A good leader will remove work from an employee's plate that does not one, provide value to the customer, or 2, generate revenue for the company. So if employees are having to do work that, again, does not provide value to the customer or generate revenue, it needs to be removed from their plate. And a good leader will ask the question, what is getting in your way? What can I do to remove things from your plate? Because employees, they want to work on what they're good at and what provides value to others. Most employees would agree with this. So again, servant leaders will look to remove that work. Now, you flip that equation, managers will want their employees to work from them. Do what I say, when I say it. We all know this type. That's a big problem. A lot of people are not going to rally behind a manager. Okay, so let's dive in a little bit further. Number 2 would be related to the job itself. So again, leaders are focused on number 1, value to the customer, and number 2, generating revenue for the company, whereas managers are focused on value for themselves. What can they have their employees do that make them look good to others? This is a common problem with managers. Leaders don't care about that. They care about the customer. And of course, a business is a profit center. So how does the business generate revenue? Okay, so let's keep going into this too, which I call the job category. Leaders focus on the big moves. It's like a game of chess. What moves can I make that are really going to make the biggest difference? In other words, going back to the customer and revenue. So how do they really solve problems for the customer? And how do they really generate revenue for the company? Usually CEOs, and this is at the big business level, they're going to be involved in, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, involved in strategic partnerships, channel partners. That's where the big revenue is generated. That's where the massive scalability is generated. It's not social media. It's not advertising. It's not SEO. That stuff is all nice, but the big moves are made with channel partnerships. So those are the moves they're making. That's where they put their effort, aside from building great teams and getting things off people's plates. Whereas managers, they don't think big. They're not thinking about the big moves, what really solves problem for the customer, what generates revenue for the company. They're focused on meetings, PowerPoints, checklists, status reports, TPS reports for those who love Office Space. But the list goes on. Things that don't move the needle. I remember through the years talking to managers and leaders. Managers, you'll hear sometimes frustration that they can't move up the ladder. And then you ask them the question, well, what are you focused on? And they'll say, well, I'm trying to get my employees to get all their documentation right and get their checklists done and stay super organized. And my response to that is, does that provide value to the customer? or generate revenue at the company? And the answer is no. So I kind of lead them down that path. But unfortunately, if you're a manager and you're stuck, what are you focusing on? The big moves or these small little things that really don't matter? I'll dive into this for a moment, but I've been at places that these managers place a high priority on the fonts used in PowerPoints, the colors, the types of graphs you use, how much content you should have in one slide. I remember, you'll laugh at this. I had a manager say, if you can get 1,000 words on one slide, that gives the perception that you know what you're talking about. It gives confidence to those who are presenting to. That's absolutely ridiculous. 1,000 words on one slide. It's like, this is a middle manager for life. I'll put it that way. But anyway, the job, leaders are focused on the big moves, what provides value, what generates revenue. Middle managers, the little things that really don't matter. Okay, moving on to number 3, that would be listening. So a good leader will seek to understand before being understood, whereas managers want to be understood as fast as possible. In fact, they will interrupt a lot. If you know, and we all know the type out there, that you're trying to get something out, you're trying to explain something or explain what you're working on or a status report or whatever, and there's constant interruption. You can't get a word out. That right there, that's a manager. A leader will sit back and then will listen. And then they'll listen, and then they'll listen. Every once in a while, I'll watch the show Shark Tank. Not the whole shows, but I usually watch like certain pitches and just rebuttals and replies from some of the sharks on YouTube. But if you pay close attention to who speaks first and who speaks last, they're all very successful, but you'll notice that Mark Cuban usually speaks last. And who's the billionaire in the group? Mark Cuban. Doesn't mean the others are not successful. They're all very successful, but that's how a good leader will be in a meeting. When I've been in boardrooms and I'm with a CEO, they'll sit back and they'll listen and they'll keep listening. They'll take in the information and then they will respond. They're not looking to get as much out or deliver as much content as possible. Make sure they own the meeting. You'll see that with managers. They want to, you've got an hour-long meeting. My goal is I want to be speaking 35 minutes. I really own the space. It's my meeting. I want to make sure they know I'm there and I'm doing great things for the company. That's a big problem with managers as well. Now, going back to managers, they typically have to ask the same questions over and over and over. You'll get to one meeting, they'll ask the questions. A few days later, they'll ask the same questions. It's like their short-term memory kicks in, whereas leaders, they have the memory. And if not, they're writing things down. So they don't have to ask those questions and waste time over and over. Another thing that we all get pretty sick of are the types of questions that are asked. So managers will ask questions such as, help me understand, or let me repeat that back to you. They do that all the time. That's kind of cringy. I'm sure a few of you are like, yeah, I know, I know that type. But leaders, they don't ask those questions. They're courteous, they're respectful, they listen, they ask direct questions, but they're moving on. We're not going to repeat things. We're not going to circle on the same thing over and over. Okay, number 4 would be the types of questions that leaders and managers ask. So leaders ask how questions, whereas managers ask why questions. How questions dwell or focus on the future. How can we do this? How can we provide more value to the customer? How can we scale our revenue? How can we grow the business? Again, it's focused on the future, whereas why questions always dwell on the past. What already happened, we can't control. Managers will focus constantly on that why, what happens in the past. That doesn't lead you, like if you're a manager out there and you're looking to grow in your career, if you're asking a lot of why questions, that's the problem. You need to rephrase that and focus on the future, looking at those, again, making those big moves in your career. That's what gets you noticed. That's what solves problems. And that's where you grow in the company you're working for. So again, ask how questions, not why questions. Okay, moving on to number 5, that would be credit. So a good leader will pass credit on to others. I love seeing this in some of these interviews is when somebody says, hey, you've been doing a great job at building this segment or this new product, or really impressed by, they'll say thank you, but then they will pass the credit on to others. It'd be something like this, like, Really appreciate that, but I do need to give credit to my team or my customers for the input, so on and so forth. They're going to pass credit, whereas managers, you know where this is going, they're going to take the credit all day. They're not going to pass it on. They're going to take the credit, and in some cases, you know this type, they're going to take credit for things they weren't even part of. I've seen articles on this. Drives me nuts. That's a big problem with managers, some of these managers out there. So a good leader will pass the credit. A manager will take the credit. Okay, so let's flip that equation. Let's talk about blame. This would be number 6. I love a CEO that when I'm watching, like, let's say it's a quarterly earnings report and something happened that caused the share price to decline, and they're grilled on what happened. They will take ownership, even if they weren't part of it. I love this. When they take the blame, again, when they're not part of it, and say, hey, we made this mistake. I take the blame for this. But here's what we're doing to remedy that. Here's what we're doing to move forward and resolve the problem and get past this. They always, I shouldn't say always, but a good leader, again, they'll own it and give the roadmap forward. That gives us as investors confidence, and it gives their team confidence. They know this leader has strong conviction that we're getting out of this. But I love that they don't pass the blame. Whereas here we go, managers. I know managers out there that they will do everything they can to avoid the blame. In fact, I've been part of meetings where these managers are assembling PowerPoints with screenshots of emails and data, even screenshots of Zoom calls, pointing out that they are not to blame, and then point the finger at who is to blame. This is a thing. I see them wasting their time, their money, their salary to spend time on making sure the blame isn't put on them. This is, I tell you what, if we could have artificial intelligence just get to the bottom of that, get those people out of a company, that I think that would be a great idea. But that's a problem. I'm sure a lot of you have been there where these people are looking to whatever they can do to throw you under the bus, make them look better. They're spending a lot of time getting there because they don't want to take the blame and lose their job. So good leader, they're going to take the blame, and manager will pass the blame. Okay, so number 7 relates to project management. You have 4 criteria. You have scope, time, cost, and quality. A good leader will focus on quality. They want to deliver the best quality to the customer. Although I know this, they are paying attention to timeline and budget, but quality is number 1. Now, managers, unfortunately, they're more focused on time. They want to get things done yesterday. Here's another example that I've dealt with at a lot of places. I'm sure some of you could agree with this. So managers will have expectations on how many projects their teams should deliver per year. And what they're doing is they're kind of laying out, okay, I can get this many projects delivered. Here are the timelines. Here are like the milestone delivery dates. If they can hit more delivery dates, that is data they leverage to present to their manager or leader to get a bonus. This happens all the time. I've been at places, get this, there's one particular company building a pretty large software platform. It was about a $2 million budget. And we were constantly behind. Nothing could get done as fast as they wanted. So we're moving as fast as possible. And I kind of came in to take over the project, and I calculated how much time was used per week to fix things that were broken because we're moving so fast. And I calculated that about 30% of the time was on rework. The software was always going down. Customers were complaining, which triggered problems with customer service as well as sales, constant speed. But management was pleased because they're hitting their timeline. They can get their bonus because they're hitting the timeline, but that does not provide value to the customer. It was a constant battle. I was in these meetings pushing back that we need to focus on quality. We need to take a step back and then move forward strategically and build things focused on quality, not speed. And everybody in this case, a leader, or not leaders, managers were, they were like, you don't know what you're talking about. We got to move faster. And I fought as much as I could, but it was a losing battle. But in this case, yes, pay attention when you're in these meetings, or let's say you're getting into a project, start asking those questions. Are we more focused on quality or speed? If everybody's in favor of speed, throw a flag on the play, be like, I don't think that's a wise decision. We should be focused on quality, and here's why. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so moving on to number 8, which is the work itself. A good leader is not afraid to roll up their sleeves and do things that are not in their job description, whereas a manager is above a lot of work. Here's an example. So I've worked at places where I've seen the CEO, they're outside shoveling snow or throwing salt on the sidewalk. I live in Wisconsin, so of course, winters, we deal with this a few months of the year. I've also seen CEOs taking out the garbage. I've also seen CEOs cleaning bathrooms. Do they have to do those jobs? No. But do those jobs need to get done? Yes. They're not above those jobs. They will get in and do the work because it needs to get done. Whereas managers, they won't touch it. They are above that work. I've seen this over and over. Even it's a little thing like maybe moving a document or finishing something for an employee, or let's say you're in project management for software and there's something that like a card needs to be added to a Trello or Jira board. Instead of telling somebody to do it, they'll be like, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and do that, add a screenshot, what's done, and then let you know I added it. Just, hey, thought I could save you a few minutes of your time. There we go. There's a leader right there. Managers, no, they will run the other direction, and they're above most work. So in summary, those are 8 differences. I know these are not all the differences, but these are really my 8. I would love to see comments below. I'm sure a lot of you have your own horror stories as well, but I could see this video expanding in other videos over time, but we'll just start with 8 for now. Okay, that's all for now. We'll see you in the next video.